Test, test, 1, 2, test, test, 1, 2. Hold on, blasted thing. There's been an issue I don't know if you actually hear me because I can't get the stupid thing to play. But there's been an issue lately with my second monitor having a terrible aspect ratio. There we go. Test, test, 1, 2, test, test, 1, 2. Alright. Hopefully we'll get to finish this today. Come on. Hold on, I'm having a little issue with my notes. Akko quickly lowered Izuku back to the ground. Oh, uh, I also think I fixed the issue with dictate not working quite right. Um, so for some reason, it's an issue with Word. Something they done with the new AI features have been messing up both the dictate program and the read aloud program. If I use the speech to text app in the computer itself instead of the dictate program in Word, it records my words a lot more clearly than the dictate program in Word does. I don't know why, but it does. Allowing the brown-haired girl to remove her quirk off of him. After a short but frenzied introduction, the three headed in to the school itself. While UA didn't have the full background on the three, they did know from All Might that, at the very least, the three had been training with each other for the past several months. I'm turning the auto punctuation off. I wanted to test it out, but it doesn't seem like it's working too good. Stupid stink bugs won't leave me alone. I swear. And that just knocked my phone off. Give me a second. So it was SOP to separate them as soon as the testing began. With all three, each being put into one of the written test groups. Being put into differing test groups. Even Sai and Lena were put in different test groups from Joy. Oh, right. I need to put that in my link. I've gone ahead and put the link to the story in the chat. Excuse me, sorry. Mm. Well, shoot, I didn't do that. I accidentally just exited out of my note. Exited out of all my notes. Give me a second. Where is it? 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 I'm sorry, this isn't the most entertaining. Just give me a second. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Meanwhile, Joey. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the UA campus. Wrong thing. I can't remember the character's name. Give me a second. Professor Denton was desperately scrambling around Dr. Lab as he readied readied his various prototypes. Okay, now for a little bit of background for those who haven't read slash watched Hero Man or My Hero Academia, it's a long. While it was never stated in the original story, it's been a long running theory of mine that Horikoshi, the author of MHA, is a fan or is a fan of Hero Man and at least at some extent used it as inspiration. Not just because it's one of the few animation projects or anime style projects Stan Lee worked on, and he's stated himself in interviews that he took a lot of inspiration from Stan Lee's work, mostly Spider-Man, but I can see a lot of details from Hero Man in My Hero Academia work. For example, if you look at some of the, I won't say plagiarism. It's nowhere near that. But if you look at some of the cover art for My Hero Academia and some of the cover art for Hero Man, you can see a lot of references, or not references, but similarities, especially with Joey and Hero Man and All Might and Izuku. You got this massive powerhouse figure, big, burly body type, red, white, and blue. And then you have this much smaller, much more nimble, faster, smarter, young child character. While Joey doesn't quite get as sparky as Hero Man, he does have he does give off light when he gets his powers really going. And you cannot tell me that the entrance exam robots do not look like knockoff versions of the MR1 from the Hero Man anime, or the Hero Man series. Those of you who don't know, it's one of the Minima, I think his name is. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Was one of the major antagonists of the Hero Man series for one of the arcs. And he created a robot that he thought could deal with the alien invaders. But the alien invaders got kicked out by Hero Man. Hero Man then becomes his next target. Which I probably should add to my notes somewhere about adding the, I think his name was Jacobs. The FBI character. Hughes. Apparently. But yeah. From what I understand, the main reason Hero Man didn't get as popular is because the publishing house slash animation company he was working with, Stanley was working with, had a lot of strict rules about what he could and couldn't do. In fact, according to, and again, I'd have to double check this. This is from memory. This is not fact. I don't know if this is fact. This is from memory. But if you, I believe in the biography section, when it mentions Hero Man, in his biography section, when it mentions Hero Man, that he actually wanted the original main character to be a girl, which is why Joey is very, we'll go ahead and say feminine looking. But the publishing house didn't want a female protagonist for a superhero mecha anime. And they would not play ball with him on that fact. So eventually he ended up biting the bullet and agreeing to change the character. And all this did, and I do mean all this did, was change the love interest and the best friend character because if I remember the concept art correctly, and then they just basically removed Joey's breasts off the character model and shortened his hair. Because Stanley really didn't want to back down on anything, so he did the bare minimum to be compliant. And when it originally released, it released in Japan instead of releasing dual releasing in the US in like originally had hoped. And it never got as popular in Japan and only recently got some level of popularity here in the States when shortly after Stanley died and they were looking at his various projects. It was acquired by Disney, which Disney then put it in a vault of its massive IP vaults, and it hasn't seen the light of day since, other than a brief test trailer for an English dub that was going to be released back on Disney XD, for those of you who remember that. So yeah, it's been in a bit of limbo hell. Hopefully someone will get around to doing something with the IP, but I don't have my hopes up. So yeah. But when the author of My Hero Academia was writing, and again, as far as I know, he hasn't made any statements about the inspiration, I do see several, I won't say outright references, but similarity. Why can't I say that word? I can say that word every other day of the week. Why can't I say it today? Similarities between My Hero Academia and Hero Man. And I'm hoping I'm not sounding like one of those tinfoil hat conspiracy people, because that isn't really my goal. I don't want to be the guy that's saying, oh, look, there's clearly this, clearly that. No. I'm saying there are some similarities, either conscious or subconscious. I think he's at least read it and maybe remembered it or something. I don't know. So I'm looking to blend it a bit into this universe. Mostly because I actually liked the villain character. I liked the MR1's design. And I kind of... he had a, I won't say quite a redemption arc. The MR1 got, the remains of the MR1 got uh, hijacked by Denton, and he did use it later in the series. So I would like to have seen the series continue. Maybe Denton using the old MR1 to continue helping Joy. I don't know. Anyways, long ramble out of the way. I'm gonna get back to this. The 5 pointers were a first. Nope. Home H. Oh, for those who don't know, the command for speech to text in Windows is the home key and then H. Oh, I just realized you can't see the text box. There's a speaker box. There's a little button box here with a microphone on it. But I guess it doesn't show up on this. I'm not going to try and figure out why. Okay, pointers were a new addition to this year's practical exam. Created by Denton himself. Primarily, they were meant to act as commanders. While the bots were strong enough to be problematic to most of the kids taking the test, their AI was, well, limited to say the least. And it was kind of meant that way. They were meant to be slow and dumb, so the students didn't get overwhelmed. But Denton had created a sort of raid camp slash mini boss effect. Small sections of the city had been highlighted as hazard zones. And while the bots within this territory wouldn't give you additional points, the bots would work together under the intelligence of a commander. The commander had a very short transmission range, so it couldn't take control of bots outside its territory, and it was programmed to try and stay and defend its territory. While the commanders were big and came in very hold on, I'm looking something up real quick. Hero Man MR1. Images. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, just for simplicity's sake, we'll say there was 8 instead of 7. Sorry. Was So first I was looking up images of the variations of the MR1. And then I looked up the entrance exam trying to find out how many blocks there were. And originally there's A through F. No, A through G, sorry. Meaning there was 7 blocks. If I raise it to 8, I can put 2 of each variant in the total. Come on. Why are you taking so long to boot up now? Okay.
She looked up, realizing 2 things. 1, the rod had given her powers, and 2, she had absolutely no idea what she was doing.
Okay, why aren't you wanting to turn on now?
Flickered and vanished as the shiny rod morphed into a bow. Kagri only just managed to dodge out of the way as the monster tried to skewer her with its beak. She drew the bow back, aiming it as best she could, even though she had never used a bow before.
Give me a second. Some minor technical difficulties here.
The arrow hit the monster and exploded, surrounding the monster in a pink mist. The monster cried out in pain, inhaling the pink mist, knocking it out and causing it to topple to the ground with a thud that shook the surrounding forest. Oh my god, haha, I did it. I did it. Oh my god. I've got powers now, and I defeated a monster with them. She shouted between laughing, just happy to be alive. As unnoticed by Akko, a giant woman started to materialize out of a flurry of leaves. She had pale skin, green eyes, long teal hair, and antler-like horns.
Come on.
However, her most striking feature was she was covered in vibrant plant life, but it wasn't just growing on her, it was woven into her very being. Flowers bloomed in her hair, and green plants trimmed her dress. With all this taken together, you might just mistake her for Mother Nature herself, and you wouldn't be too far off. Oh my, what happened here? The mysterious woman said, looking around at all the destruction. STA, stay back. Kagri stuttered out, drawing her bow. Oh dear, how did you get in here? And you're hurt, let me. Wait. That bow, where did you get that? She said, noticing the shining rod. I don't know, it just appeared here. Kagri said, not yet, lowering the bow. The Clayam Solais appeared to you. She said in shock. I didn't steal it or anything, I swear, it just appeared here. Kagri said, worriedly lowering the bow. No, I believe you, the Clayam Solais is a special item. That only works for those it chooses, and by the looks of it, it chose to help you in your time of need. By doing so, it now belongs to you.
I know you can't see it, but the thing is just coming up and it's not wanting to work.
She said, the Clayam Solais changed from a bow to a bracelet on Kagri's left wrist.
That one works. Why isn't this one working?
As she inspected the band on her May
That
I
did
know the
something
name
else.
bearer of the Clayum Salais? The woman asked, smiling down at the girl. I'm Atsuko Kagari, but most people call me Akko, she said, trying to wrap her head around all of this. Well then, Miss Akko, if you would allow me to introduce myself. I'm Woodward, the caretaker of the forest of Arcturus, and the guardian of the Clayum Salais. Woodward said with a bow and a gentle smile. So if you're this Salais thingy's guardian, does that mean you're here to take it back? Akko asked. Her disappointment was evident at the idea of losing her newfound powers. No, the Clayum Salais chose you. It is yours now. I have no right or desire to take it from you. My job as its guardian is to simply keep it from those who would try to misuse its power. As its wielder, that burden now falls to you. It's now up to you to protect it and use it as you see fit, she said, hoping to soothe Akko's worries. Okay, how do I do that? I mean use it, that is. I've never even had any powers before, so I'm not really sure how to use it, she said, looking over the band on her wrist. Oh, but haven't you used it already? Not only that you used it to defeat the cockatrice, and that's no small feat, but if you truly
Come on.
about learning to use it properly, I'd be happy to teach you how to use its power and how to use magic in general.
Come
However,
on.
I must stress that how you use it, and what you use it for, must always be your choice, and only your choice. As though you can use it for the sake of others, using it in other stead risks losing it forever, Woodward warned sternly. Okay, I won't, I promise. But I really appreciate you teaching me, Akko said with a bow. Of course, it would be my honor, Woodward said with a nod. We can start your training come morning, as it's starting to get quite late, she said, looking up at the night sky. I almost forgot my mom's going to kill me for being out this late, Akko said, starting to freak out. No need to worry. I doubt a mother who worries so much would harm their child. If you are still so desperate to return home, I'll show you how to use the ley lines. So you can come and go as you please, and we can continue your training at a later point, she said, turning to lead Akko to her home. The ley lines used to stretch to every corner of the globe. Now they barely
Okay. Something is going wrong. Give me a second to figure out what's going on. Because when I tried to use the dictate on the Word document, it just started spitting out random things. I wasn't even talking. Why is this acting up? It usually doesn't give me any issues. Yes, use the mic. Select the right mic. Okay. No. Should have restarted my computer before I did this.
the ley lines used to stretch to every corner of the globe. Now they barely circle the globe. Thankfully, one runs through a good portion of Japan, she said, picking up a fist-sized stone It will let you travel using the ley lines. Well, that is until you learn to do so
See,
yourself.
it's doing it again.
Now before I show you how to use this, I must caution you. This stone...
Test, 1, 2, test, 1, 2. Test, 1, 2, test, 1, 2. Hmm. Let's see if that fixed you. Built on four variant types. The Shielder, the Brawler, the Caster, and the Sharpshooter. The Shielder all four were built on large tank tread platforms, about the size of your average bulldozer. In fact, the Shielder and the Caster each had a bulldozer prow in front of them. But that's where the similarities ended. All four units had a roughly triangular body with a center suite head-shaped body with two sensor suites on each side, resembling eyes. But that was where the resemblance ended. The Shielder had two long, large, bladed arms. And while they could be used to stab or even at its opponents, they were more meant to be brought down and chip away at their environment, like a pickaxe. The wide shovel head with the wide, flat arms easily able to scoop up material. However, as it was allowing it to construct barricades and further fortify its territory. However, though these tools were more meant for clearing rubble or moving rock, the large, wide, flat limbs could easily be made block incoming attacks and be used as shields. Thus the name. The second was the brawler, where the shielder had long, spindly, flat arms. The brawler had a massive pair of blocky fists. Designed to pummel its opponents into submission. The sharpshooter didn't have any arms, and instead had two autocannons. Two twin autocannons that fired rubber bullets similar to the lighter two-pointers. Hold on, I'm going to double check that real quick. MHA entrance exam robots. Oh, it was the one pointers that had the machine gun thingies. The lighter, smaller villain bots throughout the course. While having a roof-mounted cannon. Thankfully, the cannon only fired what was essentially giant paintballs to simulate explosions, but they still make one heck of a mess and would hit hard enough to knock someone out if they took it head on. Finally was the caster. The caster looked a lot like the brawler at first glance. However, it had smaller fists, each ending in a metal dart launcher. Spear launcher. While it was programmed not to launch these spears anywhere near a student, spears near the directly at the students, it could still fire near them. However, it wasn't meant to try and hit the students with the spears. No, the large antenna dish looking aperture on its roof was an electromagnetic cannon. And each spear was a conductor or a lightning rod. Allowing it to not only fire its electricity directly in front of it, but to somewhat arc around its surrounding area. Denton had built 2 of each type, one for each entrance exam. Testing block. These were meant to test coordination or specialized students specialty students' acumen. Like many of the robots, if you looked closely enough, it had an off switch clearly labeled on it. All one would have to do is sneak up close enough and push the button, and the points would be given. If someone was particularly stealthy, they could power off the bot, causing the other bots under its control to have to cycle back to their own AI, buying them a small, few moment window in which they could take advantage of the chaos and switch as many of them off as possible. So if you weren't particularly good at direct head-on combat and instead specialized in stealth, this gave you a more viable way to get your much needed points rather than the all-out brawl that would be happening elsewhere in the city. While Denton had no doubts that many students would attempt to attack the mini-boss controlled zones, and would likely net themselves quite a few points from doing so, he highly doubted they'd be able to wipe them all out and take on his mini-boss alone. Either they would have to work together, or they would have to be creative. Denton smirked the small little bit of code he had been able to sneak in. The SOS signal was not allowed to be triggered right away. However, if the mini-boss unit was not in combat for more than a minute, and some of its henchmen had been destroyed, while it couldn't directly take control of units outside of its directed range, it could send out an SOS signal requesting surviving units in the nearby area to come into its range so it could take control of them. Meaning that wearing down the bots through attrition would be a lot harder than what most would bargain for. Sighed, watching his teaching aide scramble around the lab. While Power Loader was still the main support department. Teacher had been his colleague for many years. The support department, the support course was rarely large enough that they needed both teachers. But since had his own company to run, he'd often sub in for either support or business courses as was needed. He primarily acted as UA's large scale support contractor. While Cementos could make entire cities in a few days, actually outfitting those cities with the needed equipment, electricity, appliances, TV, infrastructure, cameras, and so on, that made them actual functioning sites for the students to use mostly came down to him and his company. While Powerloader was a genius, he worked better on smaller scale. Stuff like independent support equipment for his fellow teachers or for students who required something just a bit too specific for the average support department student to handle. Where Dr. swarms of robotic workers were far more suited to mass production or large scale projects. Quirk RC was never something he originally thought would be good for heroism. In fact, he had never officially attended a hero school like many of his coworkers. He was a support engineer first and foremost. That was until a disaster struck the city where his main operation center was. Buildings crumbled, people were in danger, fires were growing out of control, and the heroes were just stretched too thin. The fire department, the police, they were running doing a rather commendable job in his opinion. But they didn't have the power for the more dangerous or larger scale catastrophes. It would take them days to dig through the rubble of an entire building, where it might take a hero only a few hours to a few minutes depending on their quirk. But the heroes couldn't be everywhere at once. So, in the middle of it, of probably the worst disaster he had ever seen, an entire army of robots. So much so that at first the heroes had thought it was some sort of robot uprising or invasion, marched from his workshop as they were being constructed as fast as he could force his quirk to produce them, and offered their aid to everyone they could. Firefighters, police officers, heroes, disaster aid officers, supporters, anyone and everyone who was doing good instantly found themselves with dozens of hands specially designed of robots, specially designed to help them in their specific field at their beck and call. Meanwhile, other ones were stripping down destroyed buildings, damaged cars, and so on for material, all so he could continue to production. A disaster that should have claimed hundreds of lives and taken years to clean was ended in less than 3 months. No one knew where they were coming from until they all just finally stopped. And when they tracked it back to the source, they found a singular man, dehydrated, emaciated, and plugged into a dozen life support machines. Because, simply put, RC only worked as long as he was conscious. For 3 months straight, the man had forced himself to stay awake. For 3 months straight. Those machines had been indispensable in saving countless lives. Many had stated he had crossed the line into vigilantism. More sung his praises. While he could have technically written proper programs and AIs to run them, it would have taken him far longer than if he had just simply used his quirk. Nowadays, there was not a police station, hospital, or hero double check that. In Japan, that didn't have at least one or two of his robots. in the end, while he had been found guilty of vigilantism, he hadn't minded the punishment. "3 years of community service and a fine that, while hurt his wallet specifically, wouldn't bankrupt his company." As part of his community service, he had been approached by Nezu, who not only offered him a assistant position at UA, but also offered to help him complete the registry and requirements to get a proper hero license in case something like this ever happened again. But he had to admit, he was beginning to agree with the rat about needing a third member of his department. The sheer number of applicants this year alone had been more than the past 2 years put together. And while he still was on the fence about this Denton fellow, not for the same reasons a lot of his fellow academics in the field were. He didn't care too particularly much about Denton's quirkless status. The man's records more than spoke for his skill. No, what had him a little concerned more than a little concerned was the man's ethics. He wasn't a bad person, at least as far as he could tell. But he seemed more focused on his own priorities, his own research avenues. his own fixations, especially aliens. Though he could somewhat overlook that, when the man applied himself, especially when it interested him, he was brilliant. Seeing variables and solutions that would have taken him months, far longer, to figure out than he'd care to admit. No, it was his fixation on his students. Moreover, a small group of his former students. He'd talk as if they were colleagues rather than the more or even friends rather than what would consider appropriate for a student teacher relationship. Calm down, Dr. Denton. Professor. We ran all the diagnostics, tests, and checks last night. Your prototypes will perform admirably. After all, they are using my MR series equipment as a base. He couldn't help the little gloat that slipped in as he played with his mustache. He had more than once been asked by his students if he was sure he wasn't a cheesy cartoon villain instead of a hero, as apparently he had rather cartoonish villainous behavior and tics. One of which was playing with the the boastful inflection whenever he talked about his own equipment he could never turn off. Despite him trying to get along better with his fellow colleagues. I know, it's just Joey and Cy are taking the test today. They're going to be out there giving it their all in these exams. It's only right I do the same. After all, how can I call myself their teacher? If I didn't give my work 110, the 110% it deserves. The man shouted boisterously as a wide, almost deranged smile sprouted across his face. Just glared at him for a minute before, with a sigh and a "what can you do" gesture, went to check on the delivery and dispersal of the villain bots in the testing exam. Akko hadn't found herself in a large testing room like everyone else had. Instead, she had found herself in a much smaller room with maybe a dozen students. And a woman with blue hair and a crow familiar. She didn't recognize her as a hero. But if she was working here, she must have been. Alright, I'll go a little longer. I want to hit 2 hours today. So we'll go another 20-30 minutes. Whoops, didn't mean to black screen you guys. I did shouldn't have minimized the tab. My bad. All right. Yeah, the Windows dictate is still not working. I don't know why. It brings up the little microphone box, but it's just got a little spinning loading bar. As many of you know, the magical community has rallied with several concords over the past few years. Accords over the past few decades to more easily allow magic users to integrate not only into quirk society, but into hero culture as well. Now, what was the name of the school? What was the name of the school in Little Witch Academia? Luna Nova. Got it. Most who wish to do so intend to do so through Luna Nova Magical Academy, as it has a much more extensive magical curriculum. Rather than attending hero schools. However, some of the larger schools, like UA, have begun implementing smaller, more hands on, and streamlined magical curriculums in the past decade or so. Over the past decade or so. And while it will never be as immerse or comprehensive as what you might get at Luna Nova, we will do all we can to the best of our abilities to make sure you leave this school as not only fully fledged heroes, but as competent mages. That said, we will go more in depth on the various curriculums and resources available. If you manage to get in pass the required tests. Don't worry if you don't make it into the UA Hero course, since UA has a working agreement with Luna Nova. If you don't get in there, we will forward your results to the Luna Nova Academy if you so wish. If you have not already arranged such already, please meet me after testing ends today. Has ended for today. And we will discuss your options. Now, with that said, please come forward and take your required packets. Each packet is specially laid out for you, so you don't need to worry about someone trying to copy your work. As Akko approached the desk, she noticed each manila folder that held the packets was stamped with a different wax seal as well as their name. Ah, you must be young Akko. I wouldn't worry too much. Lady Woodworth already informed us of your situation. Just do your best. Try and do your best. The blue-haired woman said, handing over the packet. Unlike the other packets, hers was rather thin. This was due to it mostly only containing a trimmed down version of the standard test, like the one Izuku and Joy would be taking. The actual magic portion was just a bunch of short writing prompts based around varying scenarios and how she would solve it with the spells she currently knew. Even then, it nearly took her the entire time to finish it, which made her feel all the more self-conscious because even the the other students who had far more complex packets than she did, including one that had a magic circle that summoned an entire, what she could only assume was potion making laboratory. For one student. An entire potion. Had all but completed their assignments far quicker than her. The only student that took longer than her was one girl with long blonde hair. But her packet, which she was pretty sure shouldn't have been able to contain that much paper, had literal stacks of paperwork she was rapidly blazing her way through. At a speed that would make even the most prodigious corporate drones gawk at. If she was if she was worried when she thought she was taking the standard exam before, now she was even more self-conscious with having to take the specialized version. With having to take the specialized version. Joey Joey groaned as he slumped down in his chair after finishing. His test. He still had 15 minutes to go, but he was far from one of the earliest in his group. That went to a tall girl with long black hair, who had finished with almost an hour to spare, and who was currently casually reading her way working her way through a rather large book that Joey was pretty sure title was in French for some reason. He didn't feel confident enough to ask about. Glancing back up at the clock and realizing he had a few minutes before they needed to move to the auditorium, to get ready for the practical exam. Sorry, I thought we had someone joining in and commenting. I really hate those bots. Joey reached into his bag and pulled out Hero Man, as well as the small black bag Toshinori had given him with a collection of small tools and spare parts that he could use to maintain him. He had done the full maintenance on him the night before, but better safe than sorry, and began to check him over. With deft fingers that had done it 100 times before. He quickly pulled apart the toy shell, checking each joint. He didn't have time for a full breakdown, but he could at least make sure everything was in check, and found the right knee was a little stiff for his liking. He popped open the joint and with a Q-tip applied a small amount of lubricant to the joint before reassembling it. After a quick test, he started to put it back together when he felt the familiar sensation of someone glaring at him. The black-haired girl leered over at him with clear disapproval. Or, no, she was looking at Hero Man. Did she think he was goofing off with some toy during the exam? No. Well, there wasn't a lot he could do about that. He wasn't allowed to talk with other test takers during the exam. He figured if he managed to bump into the girl again, he'd explain. But shaking off the uncomfortable sensation of her eyes burrowing into his back, he quickly set back to work. He needed to finish putting Hero Man back together again. He managed to finish screwing in the last screw just before the bell rang. He quickly packed away his tools, his riding implements, and Hero Man into his bag. It was then he remembered. It was then he remembered that the bags had been searched rather thoroughly upon entering the room. Several people had to go up and claim items that, while not against testing policy, had simply been set aside because for one reason or another. Stuff like pens, markers, lip gloss, a calculator that wasn't a pocket calculator that up to the standard of the exam, and a few other odds and ends sat on the desk next to the entryway. If the teachers had had an issue with Hero Man or his tools, they would have made him leave them there. So he really did wonder why the girl was so upset. But she had already left while he was packing up his tools. So shrugging it off, he headed to the auditorium. Okay, I think I'm gonna call it. I think I'm going to call it there. It's not quite 2 hours, but it's pretty darn close. Hopefully next time, unless something new opens up in the queue, we can hopefully finish this. We only have the actual exam part, the practical exam intro, and the actual practical exam itself left. So hopefully next time we can get this done. If not, well, we'll see how it goes from there. Oops. So yeah. Until next time, this is Wrecker, signing off.